and we got a chance to earn the laughter. And I think that's why the show appealed to, I see you all nodding out there. So, you know.
The interesting thing is that when I was offered Barney Miller, I was offered, I believe, 3 different pilots. And I chose Barney Miller.
You're about to get up.
One of the reasons, aside from the writing, which I thought was much better, one of the reasons was it was in front of an audience. And I was coming from Broadway. And I thought, I'll be at home in front of an audience, it'll be easier. I was quickly dissuaded of that.
Any questions for the audience? Raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Long-time fan, first-time questioner.
Okay.
I have two quick questions for you. You can answer them in any order you like. I leave them. The first one is, my aunt actually went to high school with Noam Pittman. And of course, we knew him as Mr. Gianelli from the Von Newhart Show. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about him as a director, because he directed so many episodes.
Any questions? Put it in the chat.
And then also, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the stable of character actors that came through, which is like unprecedented even to this day.
And did you notice they repeated?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Very rare in a television series. They were very careful. Oh no, he was on too recently. We can't use him. Danny didn't give a damn. He said, this is a good actor and he'll be great in that part. That was last year. He didn't worry about it. So that's, we did have a stable of really great.
Yeah, and a big part of the reason is that they weren't brought in to just feed us straight lines. They were actually characters that had an arc and had something going on with them, and so and Danny, of course, had an eye for great actors. So for me in particular, who hadn't had nearly the experience that Al had, it was a wonderful education in how to approach. There were times, remember Ned Beatty came in, there were times because of what the scripts, the end coming down late.
We would start on a Monday morning with maybe half a script, and Danny would tell us what happened in the second act, but they hadn't finished it yet. And Ned Beatty was supposed to be on one of our shows, and he was afraid. He pulled out
After 3 days.
He said, I don't know what that second act is like. I don't know. So it didn't always work. In answer to your other question, I met Noam actually in one of the early shows. He played a non-speaking part. If you'll ever see it, it's when there was a bomb placed in the, and he was the guy who left the bomb. He came in, he sat down at a desk
Linden.
and put his thing on the floor and then
Abe
somehow
Vigoda.
disappeared. That's all he
Hal
ever
Linden
spoke.
and Abe Vigoda.
That's the first time I met Noam. But then he was a friend of Danny's, and he sat at Danny's side for a season practically.
Yeah, quite a while. He was there to observe even
To
then.
observe and see how it did. And then once he took over, he was the perfect director for Barney because he was an actor. So everything was seen from the vision of making the scene work acting-wise. And because there wasn't any staging, that was imaginative or anything. It had to do with what was real. And his background as an actor is what I think made it. We lost him to Alice for a couple of years, and then he came back. What's that? Wentworth stolen.
Another aspect of that was that there's a part of rehearsal that involves just finding out how to work it out so that Wojo is just over at the files in time to make one comment to Harris and then walk, or somebody goes downstairs and they come back, and that's when you discover they didn't have time to go downstairs and come, those things you just work through. And Danny was not interested in those parts. But at the same time, in those days, maybe still, but you could only, you could produce, and you could do 2 of 3, produce, write, and direct. So Danny was producing and writing. So technically he couldn't direct. So once the show got on and started finding its feet, we would have directors come in and they would want to really, so we'd come up with something in rehearsal. They'd want to let's just drill that all week long, well, we didn't want to just drill it, we wanted to keep it alive. And so Hal and I, we went to Danny and say, listen, because what would happen then on the day of shooting, the director would start, and then Danny would come down, and then he'd go, Joe, just a moment, I just want to say something.
Take photos?
Within a few moments, he had taken over, and the directors would be having identity crises that we would have to kind of help them through. So we said, why don't you let us do all this part that you don't like, and then you could come in and take over. And you did one, and two. We each did two, and by then I remember when my second show, Danny came down and stood at the edge like he would always do, and I got out of the director's chair and went like this, and he said, "Well, good night, everybody." And people, I could see the panic. I was panicked, and then everybody else was going. Our resident hippie is going to be on charge. But that was when Noam came back and just started directing them all, really.
Where was Barney Miller filmed?
In 3 different places. The first one was way out east,
Prospect Talmadge.
Prospect and Talmadge.
Yeah,
Way out there.
That's where we shot.
That was the first year. Then we went to what is now the museum on the corner of Vine and Fountain. That used to be a studio. It's a museum now. And we spent a couple of years there, and then we ended up at Gower and Gulch.
Yes.
Yes? Oh, yeah.
You probably knew that these men were going to be on the show. So when did you meet those actors before you did your scenes?
Sorry.
And what was that like?
Well, we'd have Monday morning was table read. We'd sit around and everybody was there. We sat around the table, read the show. Danny was there to see if he listened to the dialogue to make sure he wanted that dialogue. As I said, normally we read about half a script because the second half Danny was still rewriting. But that was the wonderful part of it, and specifically because we didn't have an audience, it was done like a movie where each scene was done separately, and we'd film it until we were happy with it, and then we go on to the next scene. It was much like live theater. We got to chew it over and try it this way, try it that way, how about this, how about that, until we were all happy.
Yes, they are.
And we weren't all happy. Do you remember the night? No, I tell you, to me this is an example of why Barney Miller lasted so long, why the quality is so good. We did a show where Harris, Ron Glass, pursuing a perp down an alley with his gun out, was shot at by a uniformed police officer because he saw a black man in civilian clothes running down an alley with a gun in his hand. And instinctively he shot at Harris. That was the essence of the show, of how we felt about that happening. Barney being the we have to live through everything, is the guy who tried to smooth things over, don't get too excited, relax, we'll take care of it, At the end of the show, we have a big fight between Harris and myself over this, and he leaves. Eventually he comes back and apologizes for having lost his temper, etc., and we finish the show. it was late at night. We were shooting that last scene where he comes back to apologize. When Ron Glass, the actor, said, "What the hell am I apologizing for? I'm the guy who got shot at. Why am I?" And it was after midnight by now. We were on golden time. This was expensive shooting. And Danny was there, and we sat down around a table and discussed it. The crew sat down, and we talked about it. Well, what would happen? How could we finish this in such a way that the squad could continue, and yet everybody would be happy with what they did? And after midnight, we scratched out a scene where Harris didn't have to apologize. But he didn't have to, because the minute he said, "What the hell am I apologizing?" everybody looked at each other and said, "He's right. He's right. What's he apologizing for?" That was the kind of atmosphere in which Barney Miller was done. That it wasn't a question of get it shot. Most sitcoms, you'll go there, there's a representative of the studio saying, "Come on guys, let's go." So here, there was nobody there, it was only us deciding that this is the way the show should be shot. Danny said, "There's no reason to do this show other than to do it as well as we know how to do it."
And that's, I just want to say that's why I think, what I find myself saying when people they were fans of the show, say you're obviously a highly intelligent person with a great sense of humor. Yes?
My favorite episode is when Kenneth Tiger turns into the Wolfman, Pokemon, and it's like, Barney. I was wondering, do you each have a favorite episode too?
That's, to me, it's like, which is your favorite kid? I'm a divergent thinker, so
Gigi,
when the
could you send
question
this to
comes up,
Joe?
what's your favorite anything, I get cascaded with, this could be my favorite song or whatever, so, no, but
I think if anything, we have a little extra love for those shows that we directed. Because we had to see those shows from everybody's point of view.
Yeah.
So, although they were not the best written ones, so, but that's the way it was. Yes.
I know you only had a few episodes where you actually left the set, and that Chinatown one was one of them. Was that something that you were like, yay, finally we get out, or was it like?
I don't think so. We were very happy to be able to function in the place we know.
those happened fairly early in the show, and eventually it settled in. As a matter of fact, the original concept was half at home.
The original concept, the show was called The Life and Times of Barney Miller. Originally, it was two pilots, totally different cast, by the way. The first pilot was half at the precinct, and the other half was at my home. It was his home life and his professional life. Barbara Barry ended up as my wife, but that part of his existence kind of petered out very quickly, and Barbara left the show after 2 years, I think. Yes, sir.
For Mr. Gale, we all know that Abe Vigoda spun off into his own show with Fish for I think 2 seasons. Wasn't there an episode that was used as a potential pilot for a series about Mojo?
Yeah, there was, and we were just talking about this last night because I had seen there was a spin-off with Fish and then with Chano with Greg Sierra, and neither of those worked out well, and it was like I was having a great time doing Barney Miller, and because the network has as part of their contract, they can order a spin-off. And I, went to Danny and said, I really don't want to leave this, And he finally said, okay, I'll give you a letter that says you don't have to do it.
So if I would have gotten picked up, you wouldn't have been happy doing 6, 7, 8 seasons as Mojo?
Well, if it had gone that way, and I had a feeling of where it might go, but I didn't. I was not really in the mix creatively of where it was going to go. I had some ideas, you know, but yeah, if it had gone down. But actually, I really realized that I was in a really marvelous situation. I really loved doing the show, and it mattered. It tried, you know, a lot of shows, you know, people would kind of look at like, well, out there in the middle of the country, nobody cares about whether it makes sense or something like that. And starting with Danny, we were always trying to make the best show we could. And I'm sure whatever you all do, you know, if you're really trying to do something well and meaningful, then life is good and meaningful, you know, and otherwise you kind of feel like you're getting drained. So.
Thank you.
Do you have any funny stories from the Muppet Show?
Muppet Show?
Yeah.
That was shot in Linden, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. The only thing I told you, I played the clarinet on that show with two of the characters. We played a Dixieland number. I played the clarinet. Somebody played a trumpet. Somebody played. It's very interesting when you have to play an instrument live on screen because you have to pre-record it because there's so many different cuts, you couldn't possibly align the sound. There's so many different cuts, you couldn't possibly align the sound. So you pre-record it and you finger to what you played. Well, I played jazz, I played Dixieland jazz. Who remembers what I played? And if the fingers didn't match what was heard, anybody could have played it. You know what I mean? It could have been just a prop that I don't play the clarinet. So I had to go home with the track and write it out. And we wrote it in on a big piece of cardboard back of the cameras, and I read what it was in order to play it. That's my memory of doing that.
Yes, sir. Ma'am.
Yes, my name's Albert. Thanks for coming. I think Barney Miller was one of those shows where there was only like 90% of the time it was like two small statements, and that was it. It was like your office and the area where the desks were, and you had the jail in the background. It was like, you know, to me, when you watch it, it was like two elevators. You know, I mean, it wasn't a very big space.
No, it was one check.
But it was one of those shows where, I don't know if it was evident to people, but it's really hard to make something interesting when you have so few steps. But you guys seem to make it interesting. I'd like to hear your take on it.
Let me put it this way. I think that the success of Barney Miller had to do with the fact that it was well written. The writing was there. We would rehearse it for 2 days before we shot it, and we had some very imaginative people in the cast. Ronnie Carey was a comedian, Steve Landesberg was a comedian, everybody would come up with funny things, and it ended up, we did what was written, because this construction was proper that way. And more to the point, we had to be professional policemen. Danny said, no, you could think of all the funny things we could do, but he would always put it this way. He'd say, would you go for help to a police officer who behaved like that? That was his basic rule. You couldn't pass that line. You couldn't get too crazy, you couldn't get too funny. You had to be able to function as a police officer. And those scripts were written with that in mind. The front there, in the blue. Two-part question. One for each, or that's okay.
First question is for each of us. The first question is, what's your advice for the next generation actors who see a great show?
I got no advice. advice. It's too hard. I couldn't do it. A guy like Danny Arnold could do it. You have to have immense vision and breadth of vision and the ability to put down on paper real characters in funny situations. That's very difficult.
And be willing to put yourself in the hospital.
Right, as Danny did.
But my advice, not just with acting, which I do get that question sometimes, to my surprise, but anyway, with anything, you say if you do it, to continue growing as a person and fulfill, whatever good you're here to do, then however it works out, it'll be fine. And if you do it because you think fame and fortune is gonna be your ticket to happiness, it'll never be enough.
Second question, can you talk about your experience?
I got this audition. I was drawn to it in a way because I had just done a play about a guy with Alzheimer's. So I was drawn to that, but at the same time, there was a part of me, I'd had a couple of called me back in for a couple of pilots, and it was just kind of a dark humor that I couldn't find a handle on. They wanted it to work, but I couldn't find it, and I went to the audition going, wow, has it come to this, because I always kind of rolled my eyes at soap operas. But I had a really wonderful experience. The writing was good, the people were, wonderful. It was a great experience, and a storyline that touched a lot of people, and so I'm thankful for it. Way in the back.
How would you compare? Can you hear me? How would you compare Barney Miller to the police shows of today?
I'm not an expert on today's shows. There's a lot of good work being done. I'm not one of those guys that, only the good old days. There are some good old days, not politically, but there are some good days. There are some good days today. I think there's a lot of talented people writing good stuff out there. There's always a tendency to overdo it, to go too far. In pursuit of funny, sometimes you go too far. And if there are any problems that I see on television, it's people trying a little too hard and going a little too far, not centering on the reality, the humanity of the character, but on the funny of the character. And sometimes it gets a little out of hand. And I think that's the thing that kept Barney alive so many years, because what was funny 50 years ago may not be funny today, but what's human 50 years ago is quite human today.
Yeah, it's cool that it still holds up. I see you looking at your watch. Are we okay? Yeah.
Can you share some stories about age?
Say?
About age.
I've always said when they ask me a question, the one question I will not answer is, what was Abe Vigoda really like? Abe was a character. It was as much of a character that he was. I knew Abe before from New York. We had, believe it or not, done a television commercial together years before. So I knew Abe from New York. But Abe was quite a character, let me put it that way. He came up interestingly to audition for a different part originally. There was a part of an Italian where Jack Sue ended up sitting. There was an Italian guy sitting there, and because he was just coming off Godfather, I guess they sent him up for the Italian part. Don't ask me why. But Danny took one look at him and said, "No, I think I got a better idea," and that became Abe.
I heard Danny said, "Do you have hemorrhoids? You look like you have hemorrhoids." And then Abe said, "What are you, a doctor or a producer?" But I have a story about Abe that because he had his own unique way of working. And in our breaks, he would often just stay seated right at Fish's chair and twirl his pencil or something, you know. So he had a way of doing things that wasn't the obvious. So we did a show where we had a very tall actor in the prison, in the jail, in a cell, and he had to go to the bathroom. And he was in there a long time. And then finally somebody goes in to check on him, and he's dead. And he says, he said, what happened? He said he took the bulb out of the light bulb out, and he stuck his foot in the toilet and stuck his finger in there. And Abe had the line, I didn't realize he was that tall. And Hal said, how are we going to play this? We're all kind of huddled around Wojo's desk. I remember where we had the scene in the plane. How do we play this? We've never had anybody die. You know, how do we think about this? You know, and then after a certain amount of time, Abe said, I know. We should play it with a loose hat. Which I thought was, you know, in the old days where the people wore the fedoras and then pulled down tight. Where were you on the night of, you know, and then tip it up. Hey, babe, we gotta go. And so I thought that was, you know, but I remember that you and Danny looking at each other going, what in the F and A is he talking about?
So either one of you talked about the episode 5, The Courtesans, and how that helped propel the show into a hit. The episode, The Courtesans.
So that was, actually it was the show that made the episode that made the show a hit. When we were a mid-season replacement, so over the first 13 shows the first year were kind of, you know, new, and people we were in like 58th place out of 90 shows. It was not great. If you weren't in the top 30, you were about to be canceled. We were like 58, 60, and something like that.
We had a good review in Time magazine.
Yes. Those people who read Time. Anyway, the episode The Courtesan, Wojo falls for a hooker, played by Nancy Dussault. And his way of dealing with it is to bust the entire house so that she cannot ply her trade. That's the way he does it. So all of a sudden you got 6 hookers standing around and 4 sitting at tables taking statements. And it's really a victimless crime is the problem. Hookers that have been brought in, you got to process them, you got to take their statements, you got to date in court, they do not show up, nobody goes after them, and that's the end of it. It's a waste of time is the problem. From the point of view of somebody who's trying to run a squad. So I had this talk with Wojo. Wojo, you can't do this, it's not accomplishing anything, it's taking our time. He does it again. Wojo, you can't do this. You've got to let these girls go. So we send them out, and Wojo finally asks her for a date. And she says, sure, like everybody else, $50. Wojo, the Polish Catholic, is destroyed. We don't know how to deal with it. Finally, at the end of the show, we have this kind of father-son talk about how you cannot change other people. You can only change how you react to them. You know, that life goes on. And as he's leaving for the evening, he turns back and says, Barney, can you lend me $50 till payday? Okay. Now, you don't have to be a writing genius to realize that the entire script is set up for that last line, right? That's of course. Well, the network decided that you couldn't say that. Standards and practices. Every network has a standards and practices guide to make sure you don't curse on us. That was those years. Now God knows what it is. But in those days, so we again were shooting the show. It's after midnight. And we're getting up to the last scene, and Danny is in the office with the guy from Standards and Practices having this argument as to whether you can say this last line. The whole show is dependent upon that last line. Finally, we get to the last scene. The director calls up and says, "Danny, what do we do? What do we say?" And Danny says, "Shoot it as written," and hangs up. And he tells the guy from Standards and Practices, "Now understand, this was the second year, I think. We were not a smash hit." And Danny said to, this will tell you something about Danny Arnold. Danny said to the guy, "We are shooting the show the way we wrote it. If you don't put it on, I'm not going to make any more." Talk about coolness. I mean, that's the network flinched, and they put the show on, believe it or not, with an X rating. A sitcom with an X rating. Two affiliates, one in Mississippi, one in Louisiana, I think, decided they wouldn't show it because it was X-rated. But once the word got out that there was an X-rated sitcom, we went from 58th place to 22nd place. And from there on in, that audience stayed with us, and that was it. We just jumped right down into the top 20.
So after eight seasons of 170 episodes, why did Barney Miller end production May of 1981? Why?
I'm sorry.
Oh, you got a first question? Yeah, then, another question.
I would imagine the single episode you get asked about the most would be the hashish brownies. Well, let me add, Mr. Linden was just talking about this. You have no issues with Standards and Practices with cops eating hash brownies?
Not by them.
Not
Eating hash brownies?
Not by them.
Not by them. This, I think, the courtesans thing happened first, and once they saw that we were now a successful show, I think that was the last time we saw Standards and Practices. But Hash Brownies was the show that defined my function in the show. Because after it was over, Hash Brownies was a girlfriend of Woodrow's sent us brownies, which we did not know were laced with hash. And the only one who didn't eat it was me, because I was on a diet. So everybody got stoned. And the picture of Jack Sue stoned, and everybody reacted differently. The only one who did not have an aria was me. Which I said to Danny after the show, I said, everybody had an aria but me. And he said, you have to have somebody to compare them to. That's the function, and that was Barney's function for the next 8 years. Was being compared to the insanity around him. That's the best.
About that brownies, if you remember, Roger brought those in a shoebox. That's what he would do. That's what someone like Boy Owens.
Yeah.
Those brownies, I love the Tupperware. She bring the Tupperware, Mojo, Red Mojo, ran with that shoebox, and then it was like for the set. I like those little parts in the shows. It's a shoebox.
I always thought my girlfriend gave them to me in a shoebox.
So, one last question. So why was the show canceled?
Show was never canceled. Show was never canceled. We, in the next to last year, we started having, let me say this, the writing is what defined Barney Miller. And situation comedy is by definition self-devouring. What I mean is, the minute you have a hit television show, the agent for the second team on that hit show, not the top team, but the second team, is now getting all the other networks to get his team to be the first team. So every year you lose teams number 1, 2, and 3, or a couple of writing teams. You have to get new writers. So everybody moves up a line. You get 2 new writing choices. That's constant in every sitcom. By the 8th year, it's tough. So Danny, in the last year, called us all together and said, listen, we're having writing problems, finding new writers. Because good writers did not want to become the 5th writing source in the 8th year. There's hardly a way up. So he said, I'm going to solicit scripts from everywhere, colleges, anywhere. Anybody who thinks they're a writer, I'll read their script. And he went away for a month. And that's what he did. He solicited scripts from any writing source to see if he could find talented writers. And a month later he came back and said, guys, there's no reason to do this show unless we can do it right. And I cannot find writers to next time.
Wow.
So I'm going to retire the show, and he went to the network and said, we're not doing it anymore, that's it. That was the end of it. It was never canceled by the network, but then he said he did not want to do less than what he could, than what he would approve. And that's the
I remember that he kind of asked us once, how did we feel? He had us all together, you know. He said, you know, if you really want to do it, it's something he kind of gave us, let us have a voice in that. And I being young and dumb and thinking, well, this happened, you know, what's next? And there were definitely some things next in my life that I hadn't anticipated, but it was, that's right, we didn't get canceled.
As opposed to my next 3 shows.
So before we let you go, you want to plug anything? Any plays coming up, Hal? Anything? Any projects, Max?
Getting a little old. I have been doing a play.
I thought you were Adam and Eve, by the way.
What's that?
The Adam and Eve story.
It's called The Journals of Adam and Eve. It was written by Ed Weinberger.
Fantastic.
Ed Weinberger was a writer for Mary Tyler Moore. He's a co-creator of Taxi. And he wrote a show called The Journals of Adam and Eve, which I've been doing, and will be continuing doing next time it comes up with someplace to do it. The last time I did it with Sally Struthers. I did it in New York with Mary Lou Hanna, and but I think Sally's back on. So I don't know. Look around. If you see The Journals of Adam and Eve, it'll be me and Sally.
Pretty amazing at 94 years old.
Wow, 94.
And we've been staying with Al the last few days and driving over here, and he is an incredible driver. I mean, he's really, you know, on top of it and safe, but also, so. I have something coming up, if they do find the money to do it, that's never happened for me before, really, because I've been offered a part in a film with months to work on the character and stuff. And it's interesting, sorry, it's being produced by a Native American friend of mine, who, which is interesting to me. When I was involved with Barney Miller, I also got very involved with Native American issues. And in those days, most casting people said, well, you know, Indians don't know how to act, because they had an idea how Indians acted, you know, behaved, which was based on non-Indians going rogue, you know, so. And this is an interesting story set in the 1870s. It takes place in New Mexico, but it follows a brother and sister from China who have come over to find their father, who's working on the railroads in New Mexico. and they get into, and she comes disguised as a man. And in time, she has a conflict, and she gets out in the desert, and the local Apache find her. And so it's about those times and those entities that were a part of the country, on its path at that time. And I think it's really interesting. And they've got a gal who's playing the lead, who's an international martial arts champion. So as the producer said, she's going to fly at some point. So it's within that style, but at the same time dealing with issues that still impact us a lot today. So.
Well, let's thank the men for the old one too. Thank you.
Next up, I'm going to sign out, and I'll be back with the cast of the Waltons. Let me wait till they leave. As they walk out the door, I'm going to log off for a few minutes, restart as soon as the Waltons come in. Thank you. Bye.